I never liked the woods behind my grandfather's house. Even before I knew what had happened there, something about them always made my skin itch. The trees were too dense, too quiet, like they held in sounds instead of carrying them. Animals avoided them. Even the wind never made it all the way through the pines. When Grandpa died, the farm was left to me. 37 acres of overgrown land, one crumbling barn, and a 1920s farmhouse that hadn't been updated since the 60s. I hadn't seen the place in almost 20 years, not since I was a kid. But I remembered the smell, like must and pine sap and something vaguely metallic, and the silence. Not peaceful silence. The wrong kind. I was 32, fresh out of a divorce, and low on options. The inheritance came at the worst time and the best. So I took it. I packed up my life in Cincinnati, put my 2 cats in the car, and drove 4 hours east into Ohio's forgotten country. Wilkins Road wasn't even on the map anymore. It started as a gravel lane off a rural highway and narrowed into dirt and weeds. By the time I reached the gate, I could barely see through the thicket of vines and fallen branches. The farmhouse looked smaller than I remembered. Gray paint peeled in long, curling strips, and all the windows were shut tight. I killed the engine and sat for a moment. The cats, now wide-eyed and silent, watched the woods. They didn't move, didn't even blink. I moved in the same day. The power worked, barely. The plumbing, not so much. I found a dead raccoon in the upstairs tub. The entire house felt heavy, like it was holding its breath. I chalked it up to disuse, the way old homes settle. But by nightfall, I'd counted at least 4 doors that wouldn't stay shut. At 3:12 a.m., something knocked on the back porch door. Just once. A single, dry knock. Not the wind, not a branch. Something deliberate. It wasn't followed by anything. No footsteps. No voice. Just that knock, like a polite warning. I looked out the window. No one. The next morning, I found something disturbing. The porch screen door, which I'd latched shut from the inside, now hung loose. Not broken, just unlatched. There were no signs of forced entry, and nothing was missing, but I noticed small, grayish smudges on the wood beside the doorframe, like something had pressed a long, damp hand there. I cleaned it up and told myself I was being dramatic. That afternoon, I explored the barn. Grandpa used to keep animals, goats, I think, but it had long since gone empty. The inside was choked with dust and hay bales. As I walked deeper in, the temperature dropped. My breath came out in clouds, and my skin prickled like I'd stepped into a freezer. That's when I found the hole. Near the back of the barn was a trapdoor I didn't remember. It was iron-ringed, hidden beneath a loose board. When I pulled it open, I expected a root cellar or some long-abandoned storage. What I found instead was a ladder descending into blackness. I dropped a flashlight down. It landed with a soft thump. 10 feet? Maybe more. I should have left it alone. I should have closed the door and walked away. But I climbed down. The air was wrong. Thick. It smelled like damp rot and rusted iron. The space was larger than I expected. A dirt chamber, maybe 20 feet wide and dug out by hand. At the center was a circle of stones like a fire pit or an altar. Around it were bones. Not animal bones. Too long. Too human. And the walls. God, the walls were carved with symbols. Dozens of them. Some looked like runes. Others were more primitive. But they were etched deep into the earth like they'd been scratched out with fingernails. I climbed back up and didn't look down again. That night, something moved in the walls. Not mice, not raccoons. Something that scratched, slow, deliberate, and vertical. And then I heard the knock again. Only this time, it wasn't just one. It was 3. The 3 knocks came at 3:12 a.m. Again, just like the night before. But this time, they were louder. Measured. Like a code. I sat up in bed, heart thumping so hard I could hear it in my ears. The air in the room felt colder than it should have been. I reached for my phone. 3:12 on the dot. The cats were crouched by the bedroom door. Their backs arched, tails bushed, and one of them, Lucy, let out a low, unbroken growl I'd never heard before. I didn't move. I just sat there, listening. Nothing else followed. No footsteps on the porch. No creak of the door. Just silence. But not an empty silence. One full of something I couldn't name. In the morning, I checked the porch again. The screen door was closed this time. Still latched. No marks on the frame. But the ground just below the steps was disturbed. Soft, like someone had been standing there for hours, grinding a boot or barefoot into the soil. I told myself it was an animal. A raccoon, maybe. Or a deer. It was easier than admitting I didn't believe that. Then I heard the scratching. It started mid-afternoon while I was cleaning out the kitchen pantry. I heard it from beneath the floor, slow and steady. Not random like a rodent. It started in the far corner near the wall and moved, sideways, as if following me. I stomped. The sound paused. When I walked, it followed. By that evening, I had the entire house wired with sound alerts from an old baby monitor system I'd found in Grandpa's attic. I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room with a bat and a thermos of coffee. The house creaked like old houses do, but beneath it, I could still hear that faint dragging sound, something alive under the floorboards. At exactly 3:12 a.m., the knocks came again, but they weren't on the porch door this time. They were on the bedroom window. 3 slow raps. Not urgent, not angry, patient. I didn't go to the window. I didn't move. I just sat on the floor, gripping the bat so tight my knuckles turned white. The knocking stopped, but I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. When the sun rose, I finally went outside. There were no footprints under the window, but something had pressed itself into the siding. A faint smudge, grayish, greasy, shaped almost like a shoulder. Not quite human, not quite animal. Long, dragging streaks led away from it, into the woods. I followed them. Against my better judgment, I followed them. They led me into the pine forest behind the barn, past the overgrown fence and into a space that felt colder than the rest of the woods. My skin prickled, my vision tunneled slightly. There was no sound, not even bird song. Then I found the clearing, perfectly round, maybe 30 feet across. The grass here was dead, brittle. At the center stood a pile of stones, like the one under the barn, but larger. Around it were small wooden figures, hung from trees by string and hair, crude, faceless dolls. I turned back immediately. That night, I tried not to look at the clock. I told myself I wouldn't give in. But as soon as the hour approached, I found myself wide awake. And at 3:12 a.m., the house breathed. That's the only way I can describe it. A sudden, deep creaking inhale, like the walls themselves had lungs and had just taken in a breath. Then the knocking came, from inside the house. 3 knocks. This time, from the basement door. I stared at the basement door, heart hammering, throat dry. I hadn't opened that door since I arrived. Grandpa had always kept it locked, and growing up, I'd only seen it open once, when a plumber had come in during a winter freeze. It was still locked now, but somehow 3 clear knocks had come from the other side. I walked toward it. Slowly, bat in hand, pressed my ear against the wood. Silence. Then, something faint, a shifting sound, like movement on bare concrete. Something dragging across it, slow and steady, almost rhythmic. I unlocked the door. It opened easily, too easily for how stiff it should have been after years of disuse. A wave of cold, stale air rushed up from below, like the cellar had been sealed for decades. I flicked the light switch. Nothing. I grabbed my flashlight, braced myself, and stepped down. The air thickened with each stare. The walls were concrete, sweating moisture. Mold crept across the ceiling like veins. The smell hit next, wet soil, mildew, and something older, like rusted meat. I reached the bottom and swung the light across the room. It was empty. Mostly. A few shelves lined the walls, old jars of preserves, broken tools, stacked crates. At the far end, behind an old water heater, I found a section of wall that didn't match the rest. Wooden boards had been nailed over a recessed arch. Haphazard. Rushed. Like someone had tried to seal something in, or out. On the floor near the boards, something had been scratched into the concrete. Deep gouges, 5 long marks, like clawed fingers dragging backward. I didn't open the boards. Not that night. Instead, I backed out, locked the basement door again, and shoved a chair under the handle. By now, the cats wouldn't go near the cellar. In fact, they'd started avoiding entire parts of the house. They never entered the living room anymore, and they hissed if I carried them past the back door. The next morning, I found more of those gray smudges on the inside of the kitchen window. High up, near the latch. Something had touched it from the inside. I couldn't stay another night. I packed a bag, took the cats, and drove to the only motel within 20 miles. A cheap, mildew-stained room off the highway where the manager didn't ask questions. I tried to sleep. I really did. But at exactly 3:12 a.m., my phone buzzed. I picked it up, half asleep, and saw a notification. Motion detected, living room camera. I sat up. There shouldn't have been motion. I hadn't set the cameras to track pets, and I'd left every light off. Still, the thumbnail loaded slowly. It was a dark image, grainy. A still frame from the motion sensor feed. The light from the hallway barely touched the corner of the living room, but it was enough to see it. Something was standing in the corner. Tall, thin, pale gray. Its limbs were too long, its head cocked sideways. No eyes, no clothes, like a skinless, featureless silhouette pressed into the edge of the room. Then the video glitched, cut to static. I deleted the footage. In the morning, I returned to the house, because I had to know. I returned just after sunrise. The house stood still, as if nothing had happened. No broken windows, no doors ajar. But the moment I crossed the threshold, a pressure settled on my chest. The air felt heavier. It was subtle, like stepping into a room where someone had just whispered your name. The cats refused to follow me in. They crouched in the doorway, yowling low, and guttural until I gave up and left them in the car with the windows cracked. Inside, it was quiet. Too quiet. The motion camera that had triggered last night was still blinking. I opened the app again. The video was gone, corrupted, just static and black frames. But the timestamp was there, 3:12 a.m. exactly. I went into the living room. It looked untouched, but the corner where the thing had stood, the carpet was damp, not soaked. Damp, and there was a faint handprint on the wall. Long, narrow fingers, almost skeletal. I scrubbed it off. Then I went back to the basement. I brought a crowbar this time. The boards over the recess in the wall were rotted and soft. I pried them loose one by one, the nails screeching as they came free. Behind them was a narrow hallway cut straight into the stone foundation. It descended slightly, and the walls were lined with more of those symbols, scratched deeply, almost violently. I followed it. It ended in a chamber, like the one I'd found beneath the barn, but larger, deeper. In the center was a stone table, and on it, bones. Real bones, not full skeletons, pieces. Vertebrae, long femurs, a cracked jaw, all aged and yellowed, arranged in a careful spiraling pattern. Like an offering. There was something carved into the table's edge. They do not sleep. I turned to leave and heard a sound behind me. A whisper. A dry voice. Wordless. Like the wind through dead leaves. Then I heard footsteps above. Slow. Dragging. Something in the house. I killed the flashlight. Stood frozen in the dark and waited. The footsteps stopped at the top of the basement stairs. I heard the basement door creak open, though I'd locked it behind me. Then slowly, I heard the steps begin to descend. One by one. I backed against the chamber wall, heart racing, trying not to breathe. The steps came halfway down, then stopped. Minutes passed. Finally, the door creaked shut. I waited a full 10 before I climbed out of that basement, bolted the door, and nailed it shut. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the kitchen with all the lights on, jumping at every creak. At 3:12 a.m., the lights flickered, and then the knocking came. From the inside of the fridge. 3 hollow knocks. Slow, I opened it. Empty, except something had been scratched into the frost at the back wall. Come see. I didn't eat for 2 days. After the message in the frost, I unplugged the fridge, just yanked the cord straight out of the wall. I couldn't stand the sound of it humming. It felt like it was watching me. The cats had stopped eating too. They hissed at corners that looked empty, bolted at sudden sounds, and started peeing near the door, like they were trying to send a message. Get out! But I didn't leave. I couldn't. Not just because of the house, because of what I'd found in the woods. See, when I followed the dragging prints from under the bedroom window days earlier, I hadn't told you everything. I left something out. I didn't just find the clearing. I found the photos. Pinned to a tree in the center under a tiny wooden doll were 4 Polaroid pictures, yellowed and warped from rain. They showed a girl, maybe 12, pale, blonde hair. In every picture, she stood in front of the same place, the farmhouse, my farmhouse. The dates on the backs were all from the summer of 1987. I was born in 1991. I had no idea who she was, but I recognized something else in those pictures. In one of them, behind her, through the window, barely visible, was a tall, gray shape, blurry, lurking in the glass like it had been watching from inside. That image had been stuck in my mind for days. I decided to find out who the girl was. I drove into the nearest town, 40 minutes out, and found the local records office. a sleepy building with a handwritten closed for lunch sign hanging crooked in the window. I waited. When it opened, I asked for land records and family registries going back 50 years. After an hour of sifting through paper and microfilm, I found her. Emily Jarvis. Disappeared July 3rd, 1987. Last seen playing near the woods behind the Wilkins farm. My farm. No leads. No remains. Case went cold by the fall. There was a note in the file. Father claimed she came home speaking in tongues, said the hollow ones told her things. Believed she was sleepwalking. Then she vanished. That night, back at the house, I set up cameras around the perimeter. Motion alerts, floodlights, everything. At 3:12 a.m., I stood outside on the porch, in hand, cold wind rattling the trees. Nothing happened. No knocks, no whispers. For the first time, silence. Then the lights in the barn flicked on. I never turned them on. I ran across the yard, crunching through dead leaves, and flung the barn door open. Empty. But the trapdoor in the back? Open! The flashlight I dropped there days earlier sat on the floor, its light still on. Batteries don't last that long. I didn't go down. Not yet. But something came up. As I turned to leave, I heard movement behind me, a soft hiss, and then a voice. You shouldn't see. I spun. Nothing, just the whisper of wind. But on the wall of the barn, freshly drawn in charcoal or ash, was a stick figure with black holes for eyes and a line slashed across its neck. The figure on the barn wall was gone by morning. I hadn't slept. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that scrawled stick figure staring back at me with its empty sockets. Its head twisted just a little too far, that line across the neck, like a warning or a promise. By daylight, the ash drawing had vanished. Not washed away, not smeared, gone. But something else had appeared in its place. Words, scrawled into the wooden slats in deep, thin scratches, like someone had used a nail or a bone to carve them. 5 before you, none left. I didn't know what it meant. Not yet. That day, I returned to town. I went back to the records office, but the clerk, a hunched, soft-spoken man who looked like he hadn't slept since the 90s, told me the old Jarvis case had always been trouble. He wouldn't say more, just stared at me with hollow eyes and said, "Some ground doesn't let go of what's buried." Then he handed me a folder, quietly, like he wasn't supposed to. Inside were 5 reports, 5 missing persons cases, all tied to my property. One every 8 to 10 years. 1954, farmhand named Carl, vanished in spring, last seen tending goats in the field behind the barn. 1963, teenage boy, cousin of the owner at the time, went into the woods during a thunderstorm, never came back. 1972, house sitter, woman in her 40s, found her car in the driveway, door wide open, house untouched, no trace of her inside. 1987, Emily Jarvis. 1996, another child, 5 years old, found her stuffed animal near the barn, soaked with blood. No body. Then nothing. Until now. I wasn't just seeing things. I was part of something old. That night, I dug through Grandpa's things again. In the attic, hidden under loose floorboards, I found a box wrapped in cloth and twine. Inside were journals. Dozens. All his. Some pages had been torn out. Others were blacked over with thick charcoal. But what remained chilled me more than anything I'd seen so far. The knocking comes when you forget their names. They are not ghosts. Not demons. They are watchers. Whisperers. Listeners. They are the hollow ones. I see them in the mirror now, watching from behind the glass. They do not need to speak to be heard. They live under, beneath the barn, beneath the house, beneath me. I tried to bury it, seal it, but the ground opened again. It always opens again. He knew, and left it to me. That night, I finally went down, into the barn cellar. This time, I brought candles and chalk. I copied the protective symbols from Grandpa's journals and drew them around the hatch. My hand shook the entire time. The tunnel under the barn stretched deeper than I remembered. The air was wrong, stagnant, and it hummed, a low, almost electrical vibration in the bones of the earth. The chamber at the end was darker this time, colder, and something had added more bones, arranged in careful circles around the edge, newer than before. At the center stood a shape, a crude totem made from sticks, hair, and teeth, and on the wall behind it, freshly drawn, Sarah. My name, scratched deep. They knew me now. My name, etched into the stone by something not human. That's when it changed. Before, I could pretend it was all old trauma, maybe hallucinations, sleep deprivation, rural paranoia. But when I saw that name, Sarah, carved in the wall deep beneath the earth, in the dead dark, I knew they were calling me. And I was already too deep to leave. I ran that night. Not away, home. Back to the farmhouse. Locked the doors, closed the blinds, lit every candle Grandpa ever owned. I drew circles in chalk under every window, around every mirror. I whispered the names I remembered from the records like a mantra. Carl, David, Susan, Emily, Rachel. Over and over, because the journal said, they come when you forget. And at 3:12 a.m., the house went silent. Too silent. Not the kind of silence you get when a house sleeps. It was total. No crickets, no wind, no hum from the fridge, no distant barking dogs, just the sound of my own heartbeat. And then came the scratching, under the floorboards. I stood frozen in the kitchen as the sound moved slowly across the house, like something dragging claws just beneath the wood. I dropped to the floor, ear pressed to the planks, and I heard it. Whispers. Not in words, just breath and tone. Male, female, childlike, all at once. Voices hissing and sighing as they scraped their way from room to room, until it stopped, directly beneath me. I stood, backed away, and then with a loud crack, a board in the floor split open at my feet. It didn't break up. It cracked downward, like something below had struck it from underneath. I screamed and ran to the porch, but as I grabbed the doorknob, it turned on its own. I flung it open, ready to run, and standing on the porch was a girl. Pale, hair matted, barefoot, wearing a tattered pink dress. The same girl from the 1987 photos. Emily? I whispered. She blinked. Her lips didn't move, but I heard a voice inside my head. They never left, not really. You just didn't look. I staggered back, but she didn't follow. She just stood there, staring at me. Then she pointed behind me. I turned, and the hallway was full of figures. Pale, tall things, faceless but human-shaped. Their arms too long, fingers dragging the ground. Silent, still, watching. One of them stepped forward. In the flickering candlelight, I saw what passed for a face. Not eyes, not a mouth. Just an indent where a face should be, like a memory of one. And then it spoke. Not aloud, in my mind. Like Emily had. You are the door. The others began whispering in unison, that same phrase, over and over. You are the door. You are the door. You are the door. I stumbled back and slammed the front door shut. But when I turned, the house was empty again. No hallway figures. No Emily. But the floorboards in every room were now split, cracked in thin, perfect lines, like something underneath was trying to come through. I packed a bag, grabbed the cats, and I ran. I drove until the sun came up, until my phone had full bars, until I was back in the city. I stayed with a friend. I didn't tell her why, just said I needed a few days. That night, I didn't sleep. At 3:12 a.m., my phone buzzed. Motion detected farmhouse interior. The camera was still on. I watched the clip. The living room was dark, silent. And then, from the center of the floor, one of the cracked boards began to lift, like something was pushing it up. And the last frame, before the feed cut out, showed fingers. Gray, thin, curling fingers reaching into the room. And behind them, just visible in the dark, my name was written on the wall. Again, but this time, it wasn't scratched. It was written in blood. I didn't go back right away. After the last video, those fingers my name, I shut the cameras off. I turned my phone face down. For 3 days, I barely moved from my friend's couch. The cats wouldn't leave my side. They hissed if I even stood near the front door. But something inside me kept whispering. Not a ghost. Not a demon. Me. Telling myself I couldn't leave it like that. Not with that house full of cracks, that field full of bones. That girl still wandering in a tattered dress, caught in something no one had ever understood. I couldn't pretend it would go away on its own. So I made a decision. I called a man named Elias, retired anthropology professor, folklorist. He ran a blog about rural cults and pre-Christian beliefs in the Americas. I'd found his writing on the Hollow Ones by accident. Turns out, he'd heard of them before. Not ghosts, he told me over the phone. Not spirits. They're a kind of memory. A wound in the land made over and over again by the same mistakes. Places that remember and punish. They follow cycles. Blood, isolation, silence. They latch onto names, dates, bloodlines. You were the next one in the pattern. I asked how to stop it. You don't destroy them, he said. You close them. How? I asked. By finishing the story. So I went back, just after sunset. I brought everything I'd collected, the journals, the Polaroids, the bones I'd wrapped in linen. I carried them into the woods behind the barn, to the clearing where I first found the doll and the pictures. And I started a fire. Not gasoline, real fire. Wood and ash, a cleansing fire. I read the names aloud, slowly, as the flames grew. Carl, David, Susan, Emily, Rachel. You are remembered. You are seen. You are not forgotten. Then I threw in the photos, one by one. Then the bones, the dolls, the pieces of the old totems I'd broken. And finally, I whispered one last name. Sarah. The fire flared high. The wind picked up, dry and hot. But for the first time since I'd arrived on that land, the woods felt still. No eyes behind trees. No pressure in the air. Just silence. I went back to the house the next morning. The boards were no longer split. The chalk on the floor hadn't faded. The scratches on the walls were gone. And in the basement, where that dark passage had always waited, there was now only stone, solid and cold, like the tunnel had never been there at all. Before I left for good, I planted something in the yard. A tree. A willow. Soft branches. Quiet roots. Something that remembered life. I sold the house a month later. Not to a family. Not to a city investor. But to a local preservation trust. They turned the land into a protected reserve. No more homes, no more secrets, just quiet ground. I never saw Emily again. But sometimes when I walk near water or trees bend a certain way in the wind, I feel a presence. Not watching, not haunting, just grateful. And I whisper back, "You're free now."